Hello, I am Michael L. Dublin Sr. I am the teaching pastor, the evangelist, minister, God's servant for South Central Church of Christ, Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been here over 35 years and have been a part of the transformation of this congregation, like all congregations. And I just want to say that it is I am appreciative of the opportunity to share with you. When Dr. Barclay contacted me about participating in this particular conference, it's the second time out of the three that I've been privileged to be a part of it, and it matters to me. And I thank Dr. Richard Barclay and his wife, who labor together and have been together over 50 years and their anniversary, and continue to do great work for the Most High God. And their planting of the congregation in which they now work for the Lord, the Stonecrest Church of Christ, and the leadership there and those who are members who support this effort to reach people around the universe. It is a compelling theme, from COVID to a caring church, as we ponder the question, does God really care? And the question certainly has an answer. At the end of it, the question is not does God care? The question is, does his people care? And we're going to examine this profound question. And in examining the question that comes out of John 11, 1 through 57, I believe we're going to be able to demonstrate that God cares and his people care, and that demonstrating that care is a process of growth and learning. I want to start with a very, very familiar example here, though. Example found in John 4, verses 5 through 30 and 39 through 42. The woman at the well. I know that most of us are very, very familiar with that particular story. As at this time, I want to walk away from the camera and get a new battery or another mic, but I won't do that. Stuff happens sometimes. And yet I want to get back to John chapter 4, verses 5 through 30 and 39 through 42. This is the story of the woman at the well. For time's sake, I'm assuming that you know the story, and I've given you the scriptural reference of John 4, 5 through 30 and 39 through 42. We are seeing Jesus tired. And while he's tired, he is on this journey from Judea to Galilee. He stops at a well in Samaria just to rest. And at noon, it's the hottest part of the day, and a Samaritan woman finds him there when she comes to draw water. We could encounter or expect this to be an encounter of just a Jew, male, and a Samaritan woman who is mixed Jew and Gentile, and think nothing of it. But there is a lot to unpack whenever you're doing a different story. And what I mean by that is the woman at the well that you see in this particular setting is not the first story of men and women at a well. And so it would be interesting in another study to think about Abraham finds Rebekah, and how that Moses finds his wife in the story of Exodus. So there are different particular scenarios that you can look at, and one of them is just pure speculation. Maybe the woman at the well thinks that this man may be there for another reason, because he's not supposed to be there in the middle of the day, and he knows that the women come to draw the water. So why is he there? With that in mind, all of the stories that you examine and the questions you want to ask about it, it starts to unfold. But what we actually find here is that the Lord Jesus says, give me a drink. And when he says, give me a drink, he starts a discussion with her that is real profound in my mind. I love the story because I'll go back and I'll read it time and time again. And every time I've read it, something emerges from this story. And I'm not one who's going to just read something, go do this theological research and then repeat it. No, I'm going to continue to dig. And I would encourage you to do that as well, because all stories, all of these teachings, all the parables, all the commands, and everything that's here is alive, and it will give you more than you can ever imagine. So then the woman knows her scriptures. So she's on a theological setting where she can talk to Jesus and have some understanding of scriptures. And so the Samaritans and the Jews are going to, they speak from the same Torah, but they have different understandings of what all of that means. But they have a common place here. So when Jesus is speaking to her, there is the common theme of the beginning point of their religious beliefs. Something to work with. And then the woman begins to tell him and listen to him. And so they are in this dialogue. So we find that Jesus actually listens to what she has to say. And Jesus knows her entire story, and he starts to tell her things that in spite of her ethnicity and her gender, he's having this conversation. I have entitled this session, The One. The One. And I'm not sure I said that in the beginning, but it becomes so important to understand then what is actually happening. Jesus knows women, he knows Samaritans, he knows Jews, he knows the world, but at this particular time, he's addressing the one, the one. And then they have the conversation about the 5 husbands. Once again, the text doesn't tell us how all of this came about, and many people will speculate as to how it came about, saying that, perhaps all of the other men died, or that she was just a loose woman, so many other things. Some have even put her in the category of being a prostitute. But we can't confirm that from the scriptures. But we can see that Jesus identifies these relationships that she's had, and even the one she has now. One thing to truly has to be remembered, that women were vulnerable. They were open to any type of attack from men because they didn't have a way of earning a living. They couldn't just go out and get a job. And it was important for them to have a husband to be able to survive. Otherwise, they were very vulnerable. They had to have a man. You wouldn't understand that, and I wouldn't understand it. But go back and look at the text, and around the world today, there are still places where if a woman is by herself, she's much vulnerable to being attacked verbally, spiritually, sexually, in every way. But whatever it is, if you look at her as a vulnerable woman, not as a prostitute or a hoe, and the things that we tend to put on her, but as a woman. Now, the other ones, whatever name you give them, is a part of where I want to go. Remember, I use the word prostitute and I use the word hoe. That's a part of what I'm going to talk about later. But what I want to stay focused on is that whatever has happened, she becomes one who takes the message into town about who Jesus actually is. There's so much more that I'm skipping because I don't have much time to talk about the one. I do want to share, though, that this woman comes with a heavy burden, and she comes to someone said, I will give you living water. Now, he didn't pour any water, so you don't see any living water, so you don't know what he means. But water is also known throughout the text as wisdom. But whatever he gave her will sustain her the rest of her earthly life, and she goes back into the village excited about having met this man called the Messiah. And then she talks about what he has said and what he's done. And so now this woman comes and other people are following her. And can you imagine then, if Jesus had not seen the one? Suppose the Lord Jesus Christ had just looked at her gender and her ethnicity and left it there. He didn't. He saw her. How often are we around women? How often are we around people and we don't see their story? We don't see the transformation and their healing. We don't see anything but the person who stands. And if we have these thoughts about her, that's all we see. We'll never see the person. What I gave you was an illustration of how Jesus Christ sees people who are dealing with COVID, who are dealing with the pandemic, who are dealing with the politics, the economic issues of our time. Whenever the church then is asked the question, does God really care and does Jesus care? And the world asks that. It's asking that of a church that represents who God actually is in our actual existence and in our actions and deeds and who will be coming and what will be coming. So while the attendance has declined and there's much more social media and many other things have happened, people are wearing masks, people are not wearing masks, and attending, not attending. It has really been a tremendous challenge to the church, and she has to be able to answer all of those things while demonstrating that, of course, yes, we care. However, it's really important that we realize that the barriers that we have are sometimes unconscious. We're not aware of it. When I share with you one of the barriers for approaching people, it would be so simplistic that you would say, wow, that's easy to think about. But is it something that you are consciously working on as an individual person? In your relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, do you think about the dehumanizing words and labels and images that we use to distance ourselves from other people and to make them unlike us and to make them people that we can justify staying away from, justify not taking the message to, and just sometimes just not liking them, not wanting to be a part of their lives? We are in a society, in a world that dehumanizes people. Throughout our history, there have been atrocities, genocides, mass murders, incarceration of large groups of people. And all of this only comes when someone dehumanizes a particular group. And those words, those images that come from those words become a tool in the dehumanization process. People are described as rats, aliens, scourges, poisonous, monsters. People are called 3/4 of a man, of a human being, and beasts, and they're perceived as redskins and other things like that not causes us, but allows us to have then this opening in our individual, church, society, and community where we want to keep other people away from us. We don't want to have anything to do with them. And anytime we begin to dehumanize people, they become animals. They are poison in our community. They're contaminants in our culture. And this can happen, and it does happen, in any of us because we're not aware of what we're doing and what's happened to us and how our society shapes us, even our religious groups, yes, our churches, by using dehumanizing language. And we say things about other people that allows other people to feel good about somebody who is not one of us. When Hitler was exterminating or attempting to exterminate the Jews, He didn't just call them words and said they were almost or unlike us. He said they were literally inhuman. One of the things that happens to us every day of our lives is that there's someone who sees us in the mall, somebody sees us in church, at work, in our cars, that don't see you as a human being. They see you on the base of a stereotype of negative, dehumanizing words, and they see you based on their own unconsciousness and unawareness. This is something that we have to deal with. We can't act like we don't do it because we are Christians. Of course we do it. Not only that, we label other people, and there are many, many, many people, religious and non-religious, people of our faith, and even in our faith communities, in our churches, in churches of Christ, that we don't want to have anything to do with because we think that they're not one of us. And we do it without any thought whatsoever. And often we say that's God's will. We say that that's who God is, when in fact Jesus Christ demonstrates when he speaks to the woman, he's dealing with her ethnicity. He's dealing with her struggles in life as a woman, as a human being. And he is doing what he can to do to ensure that not only is her life transformed and changed, and that he sees her as the one, this one goes into her village. Now he has impacted the village, starting with the individual person. You don't know who you're going to impact in a godly way. You don't know who you're going to impact in an ungodly way. But the Lord Jesus Christ has called us to be like him. So during this particular time, while John has written us and while we have looked at the text and read the text over and over and over, we're going to be compelled to see the Lord Jesus Christ as he is. I grew up hearing and still hear that because I'm from Africa originally, that I'm an ape, I'm a monkey. You know that, and some of you who may be younger, but talk to some of us who are older. And there are those who truly believe that we came from a lower form of animals and are not fully developed. They even believe that now. There are religions who would not allow blacks to be in the priesthood because we were less than. The documents from the government that declared that we were 3/4 of a human being. All of those things have ramifications today. They have ramifications today. And you actually will hear people talking about illegal immigrants, but they label all immigrants that way, especially contemporary immigrants. But everybody who came to this country is an immigrant. And the immigrants that founded this country from Europe are the ones who began to call the Native Americans savages, and they called them redskins. They called them less human and subhuman, and slaughtered them, massacred them. And in 2023, you don't think about how inhuman it is for us that in this country, they are still Native Americans, people who are native to this country, who are on reservations, who have a severe problem with alcoholism, health issues, and so long before African Americans were brought, black slaves were brought to this country, the dehumanizations of the Native Americans had already taken place, and it's accepted now. What do you hear from a political standpoint, social? If you're not a part of the realm of the people who are part of Native America, you don't hear anything. So sometimes we're not intentionally against anybody. We just are used to those dehumanizing terms and images, and we think the way that the culture teaches us. But that's not the way that the Lord Jesus Christ taught us. We have a hard time overcoming. So in order then to be able to see that one, to share the gospel, to start a new life with any man, any woman, any child, any person, we have to look and ask God to show us, am I one of those people who carries negative stereotypes? And am I one of the people who's more destructive than I am a carrier, one who is living the gospel? Whether it's intentionally or not, whether I'm aware of it or not. So Jesus, the Christ, demonstrated to us over and over with the woman at the well. And let's talk about somebody else. Jesus in Matthew 8, 1 through 4, came down from the mountain. Crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, I will be clean. Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. How many people are you willing to touch? Or how many people you refuse to touch? Because you have a belief, a stereotype, an image in your head of who and what they are. Jesus knows that he would be unclean. He knows all the consequences, but he doesn't see a leper. He sees a human being. No one gives themselves leprosy. People don't give themselves diseases. And there are some things that people have that are diseases that came as a result of some poor choices they made, but no one made the choice to do this so that they could receive these crippling diseases. That just isn't true for anybody. And so he sees a human being. No one has probably touched him for months, maybe weeks, but maybe years. And I don't know of a human being that doesn't need to be touched sometime. That from this hug, from this handshake, is a confirmation, an affirmation that in fact one can be healed. I don't remember all the details of a supposed scientific study, but it says that people need multiple hugs every day. Jesus says, greet one another with a holy kiss. We would never give much thought to that because it means caring for people and touching them. And we can rationalize and teach how back then it meant this and it meant that, but now we greet. But even that, we really and truthfully don't have the dialogue that tells us we need to touch others. Now, I know there are people in your church. I know that there are people in your assemblies and people that you're familiar with that you touch. That's not what I'm saying. How many people is it that you will not touch? How many people are like the leper to you? So in your communities, are you willing, and usually the first person to say, let's establish a mental health ministry. Let's see what it takes. Let's do a strategic plan. Let's look and see what it takes to help those who are lost in their addictions. And how can we formulate a primary prevention ministry when it comes to substance abuse? How can we have our sons and daughters and the parents in our congregation and surrounding communities to come together every quarter and to receive training and teaching on these issues? After all, we do have the building here and it's not being used so often. And so you can work with those facilitators from outside. Everybody who's outside is not against you and trying to destroy your church. There are people who in fact want to see a whole and a wholesome, mentally, physically, financially safe community in every way possible. But how many times have you thought about that the mothers that will one day suffer from their sons and daughters being in addiction, perhaps being killed, perhaps going to prison, get so overwhelmed, and what they actually need is someone who's willing to touch their communities, their families, and to be able to provide the training and the teaching and to say that you matter to me. So then, Jesus touched. Now, I was just talking about emotional and psychological touch, but Jesus talked and touched this man. Everybody who has a heart of shepherding, like the Lord Jesus, I mean, that's just what's going to happen. Jesus also had the rich young ruler, Mark 10:17-27. And the rich young ruler just knew he had done all he needed to do. His life was just everything was in order. Now, Jesus could have been frustrated with him and told him off. You know how we tell rich people off. But Jesus, in verse 21, looking at him, loved him. So in this time of COVID and pandemics, and in this time of stress politically and economically and every way possible, we're in chaos in our culture and in our society. Jesus saw the one. He had eye contact. Have you been in settings where you won't even look at people? He shows his interest. He shows that he's communicating that he loves him by looking at him. Now, the rich man could have just totally avoided all of that. But once Jesus looked at him, Jesus said, "You lack one thing." The rich man said, "I followed the commands. I've done everything I was supposed to do, and I've done this from the time I was a young man." And Jesus looked at him, loved him, communicating to him that he mattered to him. And then he tells him out of his love, "You lack one thing." In Luke 19:1-10, Jesus looked up at Zacchaeus. Well, Zacchaeus, short in stature, we know that, right? He's climbing up this sycamore tree to see Jesus. Not your average religious man, not very popular by any means. Most likely because he's a tax collector, he's likely to have been hated, but he's desperately climbing up a tree to get a glimpse of Jesus. When is the last time you climbed a tree? When is the last time you desired to climb a tree? I have that desire all the time, but I've got enough wisdom not to do it. But God created the trees, and they are part of creation. So maybe you ought to just lean against one, do